Hello, 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 and welcome to episode 45 of Radio Free Filler. Well, the season has changed, the vaccines are rolling out, and things are opening up, hopefully not too soon. Meanwhile, the flowers are blooming, the birds are singing, and the bugs are once again making their presence known. So that's our excuse for bringing you another installment of our feature called Fairy Tales for Insects.
What? So soon? What's the rush?
Would you rather we start off with something else?
How about something a little more classic?
Like an old movie?
Earlier.
Something by Mozart?
Earlier.
How much earlier?
I was thinking of something from the reign of Queen Elizabeth.
Isn't she more recent than Mozart?
Queen Elizabeth the First.
So what can we do about Queen Elizabeth I?
Something about an unsung hero of those times.
Like who? Sir Francis Drake?
Actually, he's already quite well known for his military exploits.
Sir Philip Sidney?
No, there are still some English majors out there who are fond of Astrophel and Stella. I'm thinking of someone more obscure.
Such as?
Christopher the Chiropractor.
Isn't chiropractic a more recent therapy?
Christopher was ahead of his time.
So why haven't we heard of him?
Because of the scandal and the later controversy.
Scandal and controversy? Isn't that the stuff of history?
Not low-level scandal and controversy. Besides, the news traveled differently in those days. Here's an example.
9 o'clock and all's well. 9 o'clock and no it isn't. 9 o'clock and yes it is. 9 o'clock and things are terrible. 9:01 and all's well. Give me that bell. Nothing doing. I'm the official town crier here. Oh, yeah? Well, take that. 9:01 and village violence is on the increase. I had no idea it happened that way.
It didn't.
Then, what was the point of that demonstration?
To show how the news media has changed.
Oh. Can we do fairy tales for insects now?
No, we haven't done Christopher the Chiropractor yet.
Oh, all right. Did he have any famous clients?
One of the biggest, William Shakespeare.
No kidding. What did a chiropractor do for Shakespeare?
He helped him through his many cases of writer's cramp. He was also an excellent juggler.
I didn't know that Shakespeare juggled.
Kindly spare me your attempts at misdirection comedy. You know perfectly well that I was referring to Christopher.
Yeah, well, I thought this bit could use a little perking up. So why haven't we at least heard about Christopher the Juggler?
There were a lot of other jugglers around at the time. It was hard to stand out.
I guess you're right. I don't know of any other Elizabethan jugglers either.
There were quite a lot of them, but nobody remembers their names.
But what was the scandal about if there were so many jugglers?
The juggling was all right. It was the chiropractic that was the problem.
Did someone suspect witchcraft?
Not exactly.
So what happened?
Someone referred to Christopher as an osteopath.
Isn't that practically the same thing?
Not really, although there is some overlapping. The problem is that nobody had heard of an osteopath either, and they thought it sounded scary. Once the rumor got out, Christopher found that he couldn't get any other clients. Eventually, he had to go back to juggling full time.
That must have been depressing.
Not so much. Christopher was much prouder of his ability as a juggler. Unfortunately, after a while, the only thing he was known for was the fact that he was somehow connected to Shakespeare, and he didn't dare disclose what the connection actually was.
So he went down in history as just some guy who knew Shakespeare?
Well, at least that was the end of the scandal. Then came the controversy.
Didn't Christopher have enough troubles?
He certainly did, but the controversy didn't come until after he had already died.
So what was the controversy?
A number of debunking students concluded that Christopher didn't actually know Shakespeare at all. They said he must have known Sir Francis Bacon instead.
Did Sir Francis Bacon juggle?
Please, try to focus.
Sorry.
As a result, a lot of research was done to see if Sir Francis Bacon had ever used a chiropractor.
Were there any results?
None whatsoever. One problem was that the controversy started in the late 1700s, when the term chiropractic still hadn't been invented, so it was impossible to get any hits on a Google search. The other problem was that there wasn't any Google to search with either.
So that's how Christopher the chiropractor got lost to history.
It's one of the strange things about history. A person might wish to be known for one major accomplishment, but, by association, it gets overshadowed by some other circumstance. And, as was the case with Christopher the chiropractor, they sometimes get forgotten altogether.
Well, all of this has really made me think.
That's nice to know.
And do you know what it makes me think?
No, what?
It makes me think it's time to do another installment of Fairy Tales for Insects.
Are you going to read this one?
No, I think we should give it to old Ben.
Howdy. This story is called The Sleeping Beaut, and it's a real whopper. There's really not much to tell here. Yet another princess was born into yet another royal family, and yet another witch got offended like they do, and the witch cast a curse upon the child. The only unusual thing here is that this particular witch was kind of scatterbrained, so the curse was more convoluted than usual. At some point between her 13th and 17th birthdays, the princess would either prick her finger, step on a crack, tie her shoelaces together, sass back once too often, forget to floss, or stay up really, really late at night, whereupon she would fall into a deep sleep. While the princess slept, she would be visited by either 3 spirits, 7 dwarfs, a traveling salesman, or a wolf who would try to blow her house down. She could only be awakened by true love's first kiss, a drop in health insurance rates, the sun exploding, or at the end of 17 years, in accordance with the somewhat peculiar statute of limitations in that kingdom. One day, a handsome young prince managed to successfully hack his way across her very messy bedroom, and he kissed her, but the princess didn't wake up. In desperation, the king issued several royal decrees, but health insurance rates continued to climb, so the princess didn't wake up. Then the sun exploded, but that took place in a different story, so the princess didn't wake up. Finally, at the end of 17 years, the princess yawned, stretched, roused herself, crawled out of her bed, and died because she had also turned into a cicada. You probably saw that one coming.
Can I read the next one, please?
If you really want to. What's so special about this one?
Oh, nothing. I just wanted a chance to be on radio again. Once upon a time, there was an ugly duckling who turned out to be a swan. There was an even uglier duckling who turned out to be Ferdinand the Bull. Then there was another duckling who turned out to be either Salmon B. Chase or John L. Lewis, and the relative degree of ugliness is open to debate. Ducks and ducklings are notoriously imprecise in the matter of visual identification. Nobody even bothers to tell stories about the ugly mother duck because ducklings have been known to imprint upon and follow around dogs, sheep, farm hands, tractors, and other farm implements, research scientists, and probably even John L. Lewis if he wandered too close by, ugly or not. However, when that many stories accumulate, they cease to be accepted as fairy tales and pass into the mainstream of accepted behavioral science. It's a pity because a lot of people could use a few more fairy tales. However, as insects, we don't really care about that. Our story is called The Really Ugly Duckling. This duckling was so ugly that the other ducklings wouldn't even acknowledge him as a fellow bird. The swans would have nothing to do with him either. Ferdinand the Bull was merely indifferent. Salmon B. Chase had other things on his mind. Tractors and other farm implements don't communicate at all. Don't be silly. Dogs, sheep, farm hands, and research scientists were all busy conducting behavioral experiments on each other, with no group being any the wiser. Followers of John L. Lewis came by, but were told, never mind. Their objections that they had actually mined quite a lot were ignored, especially by the sheep. However, it turned out that the really ugly duckling was actually a dung beetle. He found this out one day, but only after seemingly endless searches and inquiries, all desperate attempts to find a society where he could fit in and gain acceptance. It happened suddenly. He was crawling along when he met a lady dung beetle. "Hello," he said. "I don't talk to strangers," she said. "If we introduce ourselves," he said, "then we won't be strangers." "If you don't go away," she said, "I will call my brother, who is the biggest, strongest dung beetle in town." "So you're a dung beetle?" he said. "Yes, of course," she said. "So are you." "Will you marry me?" he said. "Certainly not," she said. "Why not?" he said. "Because you're a really ugly dung beetle," she said. Sometimes you just can't win.
And now we have a full-blown bedtime story. Let's listen in.
All right, Junior, it's time for bed.
Only if you tell me a bedtime story.
Oh, all right. Here's a short one.
No, I want a long one. I'm not sleepy yet.
Very well. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there existed the tiny town of Gullible. It really was only a little town, but all the inhabitants thought it was a kingdom because some guy had told them so. Coincidentally, this same guy also told everyone that he was the king. He said that the actual name of the kingdom was Royalty, and they all believed that as well. The king was pretty clever, and he became quite popular. None of his subjects were ever required to pay taxes, and they all thought that was great. Of course, they did pay something called royalties, but that just seemed appropriate. After all, that was the name of the kingdom.
When do we get to the insect part?
Be patient. You said you wanted a long story, remember? That will come in later on.
Okay.
Anyway, the king had a brother who was also pretty clever, but not quite so clever as the king. The brothers had been separated at birth, but who hadn't? That's what happens when they cut the umbilical cord. Now, the brother didn't have a kingdom. He just traveled from town to town, pretending to earn his keep by promising to perform certain unpleasant tasks, but actually doing little or no work. Sooner or later, this became apparent, and then the brother would move on to the next town. One day, the brother heard about the new kingdom called royalty. He put two and two together and came up with Kaching, which was close enough for his purposes. He crept into the town one night and helped himself to the contents of the bakery, the winery, and the confectionery. Then he stopped in and got reacquainted with his brother, the king. The two men got together and arrived at a mutually satisfactory arrangement. The following morning, the king gathered his subjects together and issued a formal announcement. The kingdom had suddenly developed a rat problem. However, there was no cause for alarm because a solution had already been arranged. Then the king introduced everyone to a new visitor whom he called the Pied Exterminator.
Ooh, I don't think I like this story. Is this where the insects come in?
Not yet. Don't worry, we'll get there. The Pied Exterminator was certainly a colorful-looking character, and a lot of the people were confused by his appearance as well as his name. However, the king explained that the expression pied simply referred to the exterminator's colorful costume, which was covered in splotches of various shades and hues. Beyond that, the king said only that this distinctive outfit was merely a uniform, much as the baker wore a white apron and the tanner wore leather. The king did not mention that this pied exterminator was actually his wandering brother, and that the multicolored splotches were the result of the brother's being pelted with various rotten foodstuffs as he made his hurried escape from the other towns. However, the good people of the town of Gullible cheerfully accepted the part of the story that they did hear, since they did have the evidence of the missing baked goods, wine, and candies. They welcomed the pied exterminator and accepted him as their savior. The rest of the day was spent cleaning up and restocking the bakery, the winery, and the confectioners, and then everyone had a great dinner feast to celebrate their upcoming rescue from the rat invasion. As the guest of honor, the pied exterminator explained that he could perform his miracle deed only in the dark of night, after all the townspeople had gone to sleep, because that was when the marauding rats would come out to do their mischief. He swore that, as long as everyone remained in their beds all night long, the problem would be completely solved by sunrise. To this, all of the townspeople readily and enthusiastically agreed. The next morning, the king and the pied exterminator led a procession throughout the town, performing a thorough inspection of all the buildings. Sure enough, there was no trace of any rats to be found, since there had never been any rats around anyway. The townspeople rejoiced, and the children all paraded around their newfound hero. After a jolly celebratory march back to the palace steps, the pied exterminator turned to the king and asked if he could now collect his fee.
Ooh, is this where the trouble started?
Not at all.
Did the king refuse to pay, and did the pied exterminator lead all the children away?
Certainly not. What kind of nonsense have you been listening to? Let me tell you what really happened.
Okay.
The king simply turned to address his assembled subjects and addressed them in a loud, clear voice. What manner of reward shall we now give our great friend? At this, the grateful town people all showered the pied exterminator with coins, jewelry, and all sorts of other valuables, and the town tailor even gave him a finely embroidered and very capacious bag in which to carry it all. Then there was another dinner feast, and everyone spent a happy, contented night. The following morning, the king and the pied exterminator were visited by a resident of a poorer area just outside the kingdom. I was passing through yesterday, said the stranger, and I observed a great celebration. I made inquiries, and some of the townspeople explained the cause. That is why I have come to you. Yes, said the king. Go on. Well, continued the stranger nervously, I live nearby, in the swampy area, just outside your borders, and we seem to be overrun with flies, roaches, and several other kinds of insects. I was wondering if your new man could provide us with any relief." The king and the pied exterminator exchanged knowing glances. "Let us discuss the matter privately," said the king. "We'll be right back." And so the stranger waited patiently while the king and the pied exterminator conferred in the royal chamber. The situation was an awkward one. It would not look well for the king to simply turn the stranger away and refuse to help, but this new problem seemed to be a real one, a problem that might require some actual work. In addition, the poor swamp community had little to offer in the way of financial reward, so there was little to gain from success. However, the clever king and his fairly clever brother soon arrived at a strategy for managing this new challenge. "Yes," said the king when they reconvened their meeting with the stranger, "we will consider your situation. The first thing to do will be for our pied exterminator to conduct a thorough inspection of your locale, and then provide you with an estimate of the cost for a solution. If you are then able to make the full payment, you can deposit it with me. I will hold it in trust until the work is completed. The inspection will take place tomorrow." This seemed to be satisfactory to all parties. The inspection and estimate would be performed free of charge, since they involved little more than a stroll through the nearby village, but no actual work would be performed until the payment had been deposited with the king. The stranger returned home, filled with hope. The king and the pied exterminator remained in the palace, filled with duplicity. The scheme was simple. The exterminator would visit the swamp village, return to the kingdom, pretend to make calculations, and then announce an estimated cost that the poor villagers could never afford. Regrets would be exchanged over the village's inability to come to terms, and the matter would be dropped. Fortunately, however, that is not the way things turned out. The following morning, the pied exterminator made the easy and comfortable journey to the swamp village. He strolled through the infested area, and that was when the fun began. The many and varied insects who lived in the swamp all took a look, sniffed a sniff, and immediately flocked to this new visitor whose clothing was covered in yummy, rotten foodstuffs. Flying insects, crawling insects, and creeping insects of every description all joined in the magnificent feast and clung to the pied exterminator as they ate. The exterminator realized that he could not return to the kingdom while he was covered in ravening insects, so he simply kept on walking until he had left the swamp village via the far border, never to return. The residents of Swamp Village were delighted to be bug-free, especially since no payment was ever demanded. The king settled back into his familiar, comfortable lifestyle in his realm of royalty, and everyone there was content. As for the pied exterminator, he is still revered as a great benefactor to all the hungry throughout the insect community, and there are still some who hope that he will someday pass their way.
What a great story! I love happy endings.
Well, that about wraps it up for...
Aren't we going to have a song on this show?
Well, I guess we have time for a short one. This one's called Dead Bug Blues. If I try climbing up that wall, they say I'll have no chance at all. As fast as I could say, what's that? A swatter would come, and I'd go splat. Lord, Lord, I got them dead bug blues. And to say that I won't live to see the 5 o'clock news. If I go crawling on the floor, as soon as I get under the door, as fast as I could say, oh my gosh, a foot would come, and I'd go squash. Lord, Lord, I got them dead bug blues. I don't want to end up underneath some human's shoes. Chemical warfare. This is worse than COVID. Well, it was a song anyway. Now that really does wrap it up for this show. Be safe, be careful, and try to think a kind thought about your local insect. Thanks for listening, and tune in again for the next installment of Radio Free Filler.